Welcome back to Watercolor with Jane M. Mason. Now, we'll get back to the painting.
In the front of this wave, I'm going to go back to making some of this little foamy net material that I made up over here too. It's just a matter of creating spaces. There's a bit of a backflow here, so I'm going to try to erase the edges so it looks more natural. A backflow is when wetter water lands in a space and it'll push the paint out, and on the leading edge it'll make a dense line, and I don't want that dense line out on the leading edge. So. On this front edge of the foam, I'm going to do a couple little things, different things. The first is I'm going to take a watercolor crayon and I'm just going to add some of the foaminess to it. And I'm making a round scribbling kind of color to add the foaminess to it. The same way I will add some of the foaminess out here into my wave. I'm also going to take some white paint, and I don't use white paint very often. It's an opaque paint, and I'm going to add just a little bit where I want the foam to seem like it's coming up more. Just kind of accentuating some of the spaces that I've created. We're going to come back now and work a little bit on the foreground. So I'm going to go back to using a little bit of a green and creating some big spaces in the foreground here. And as we did in the background before, it's a dancey stroke. Some of it is linear, some of it is very round. I try to think of a combination of shapes. So, and I think about the vegetation too. And in this vegetation, there are, as I mentioned, some beautiful yellow flowers. I think it's mustard, and some fairly large green leaves in here too. So we'll add much of the green, and then we'll come back on the very last and put some of the yellow in on top. I don't want this to be too busy on this side of the painting because the rest of the painting is quite muted. So after I get some of the spaces in, I will go back and see if I should glaze over it with water to homogenize the spaces. You can always glaze over any space. Sometimes when you're doing shadows, for example, it's nice to glaze over a space because then it will give you that extra layer of color that you want. In this particular one, I think I will add some, I think I'll add a little bit more variety. I think I'll add more brown because obviously in the dunes, there's a lot of sand and there's a lot of brown popping through. So I'm going to add some of that. And I'm adding that in a more horizontal way to suggest more of the ground. Not quite yellow enough for me. You can see how adding these horizontal lines helps this area sort of lie flat, so you get the idea that this is a different space than the beach. I am going to glaze over some areas, so I'm adding just water basically to help bring some of these more irregular spaces together. This I can use a little bit more paint, I think, up through here. Now, a lot of these green flowers, they have a very bright green leaf. So I'm going to take a bright green, and it's more vertical. So I'm adding this, I'm going to make it even brighter than that. There we go. Even more yellow. So I'm going to add some of that on top. And this will also help give the illusion of these vertical flowers growing there. A lot of watercolor is layering and glazing. Because there's a lot of sticks out here too, I'm going to add the sticks. And again, I'm going to take the end of my brush and just drag through the paint. You have to do this when the paint is wet. If you wait until the paint is too dry, you won't be able to find the white of your board or your paper because the paint has already dried. So there's a good bit of timing on this. You want to do it when it's wet. Okay, we're gonna let that dry and we'll be back in a minute. We are making progress on our beach painting. What I'm gonna do now is add a little bit more color behind the front foam here so that we can tell that this is the foam that's coming in from the wave. And again, I want to go not too fast so that I have time to smooth out any lines that I have that are too distinct. I want to make sure it seems very natural, very watery, organic, realistic. So add more of the kind of brown sand color to the foam. And then make some of these spider net lines over the rest of the foam. And I don't want to get too fussy with this. I think it was a really beautiful day, and we had this great mist that came through, and it made things very subtle. So I don't want the front part here to be too overdone, or it's going to stand off from the back part of the painting. So just enough so that we can tell this is the leading edge of the foam. And I think we're almost to a point where I don't need to add more. If you're painting this at home, this would be a good time to stand up and step back and take a look at it and see what kind of things that you might want to add to it. And I'm also going to add a little bit of the brown, not too much up here and there, because often in the waves as they come over, there's quite a bit of sand that they've picked up in the waves too. This one I think I'm just actually going to leave almost white, yeah. Okay, and I'm going to go back to add a little bit more of my white paint. Again, I generally don't use white, but I find it helps in my water paintings to add a little bit of white to my foam, to my waves. Allows you to add a few things that come up over above the actual waves, which makes it look very realistic. Then there's a couple more tricks I'll show you here, then shortly we'll be done. I'm not too happy with this front foam, so I'm going to add some white in here too. It was very, very white on the beach, and it's hard to get it that white. I often talk about John Singer Sargent, and some people say that he was very careful that he never used white and used the white of the paper to stand in for white. And although he frequently did that, there were many times that he did use white in his paintings too. So there's nothing wrong with using the tool that makes you accomplish what you want to accomplish. And in this particular case, I want to make sure the foam is foamy enough looking. I think I'm done with the foam momentarily. I'm going to add the beautiful yellow flowers that I see back here. And yellow tends to stand on top, which is a good thing. So I will just dot these along in here. This is probably a cad yellow medium, this color yellow. You know, there have been some problems with the cad paints, but they're reformulating them, so that is a good thing. So the new cads are stable and should be safe paints for you to use. I think that I might put kind of a massive yellow on some of these. I don't want this to be too dotty, so it just looks like polka dots. I do love polka dots though. Okay, I think that takes care of our yellow. And I have something kind of interesting I'm going to show you. I don't know how well you'll see it on the video, but it's something that you can try at home. There is a paint that's called Interference. It's a Daniel Smith paint. And when you paint with it, particularly for me, when I use it over water, like this ocean or this bay, when you look at the original, when you look at the painting, it makes it iridescent. It makes it shiny. It's very fun to have in a painting. So you can just paint with it over the paint that you already have down. I'm going to add a little bit to this wave, a little bit to the water behind the wave. Like I said, it'll be difficult for you to see on the video, I think, but if you get some of this, it's fun to play around with. Sort of like metallics are fun to play around with too. So I'm adding a little bit to the water here and there. It's so foggy, you wouldn't have seen a lot of sparkle back there. I'll add a little bit to the foreground. And then I think what I'm going to do too is, so stand back, I'm going to do some splattering here. I'm going to take some of my white and I will hit it fairly hard. This is a round brush. It's pretty loose paint. I'm going to hit it against my finger and I'll get a little bit of a spray coming up. Hopefully you can see that. I think when you're doing waves, it makes it much more fun to have some of the spray coming up. That's a little bit all over the place, and that's okay. Ooh, I like that. A few bigger ones. I'm kind of clumping them here for a minute. To me, if I'm doing waves, that adds that extra element of feeling like you've caught the wave in the moment. There. I'm kind of clumping some here too. I picked sort of 3 areas where I'm clumping the spray. I think I might take a little bit of this out. A little too much. I think I'm pretty happy with that now. I'm going to stop there. Thank you for joining me. We've had a great time here at the beach, have been watching some wonderful weather roll through, been making some changes about our paintings. We've allowed the mist to fog through the background and yet keep the distinctness of the foreground. So I've had a lot of fun doing this painting. Thank you for joining me. I'm Jane and Mason from Watching Paint Dry.
Thank you for watching. Join us next time, The Watercolor with Jane M. Mason.